The debt came due on a Tuesday in November, and the interest was a girl of 22. Rosalind Fairweather stood in the doorway of her father's study and understood, in one breath, that she had walked into the last hour of her life as she had known it. The fire had burned down to a sullen orange. Rain moved against the windows in long gray sheets, and on the desk, where her father's ledgers had lain untouched 3 years, there was a document with a red seal, and beside it a pen, and beside the pen her father's hand, shaking. "Come in, my dear," said Sir Edmund Fairweather. "Shut the door." There was a second man in the room, thin and dry and dressed in unrelieved black, and he did not rise when she entered, which told her what she was worth in it. "Miss Fairweather, my name is Pruitt. I have the honor to act for His Grace, the Duke of Ravenscourt." "You have the honor," Rosalind repeated. "How pleasant for you." Her father made a small sound. She did not look at him. If she looked at him, she would forgive him, and she was not ready to forgive him. Not while the rain was still falling on a house that had been in her mother's family 4 generations, and would not be theirs by Christmas. Pruitt read the terms in the voice of a man counting sacks of grain. His Grace had bought up the whole of Sir Edmund's debt, £11,000, and was content it should never be called, in consideration of which Miss Rosalind Fairweather would contract to marry His Grace's only son and heir, the Marquess of Stanhope, would remove within the fortnight to Ravenscourt Hall in Yorkshire, and would be married from the Ravenscourt Chapel on the 2nd day of January. "And if I decline?" Pruitt looked up. He had pale, patient eyes, the eyes of a man who had watched a great many people decline and then, in the end, sign. "The notes are called in on Friday. Your father goes to the Marshalsea. This house is sold. You would go, I imagine, to your mother's people in Bristol, if they will have you." He let it sit. "I am told they are in trade." There it was. The little knife slid in politely between the ribs. "My grandfather built ships," Rosalind said. 7 of them are still afloat. How many things has His Grace built?" "Rosalind," her father whispered. She crossed to the desk and looked down at the beautiful copperplate that had reduced her to a clause. "Has the Marquis seen me? His lordship has been 8 years abroad, lately in the peninsula. Has he consented?" Pruitt hesitated, which was answer enough. His Grace consents on his behalf. And that was the thing that decided her. Not the debt, not the Marshalsea, not her father's ruined face. It was the cold discovery that somewhere in the world a man was being sold that night as surely as she was, and that neither of them had been asked. "Then I am the interest on the debt," Rosalind said, and took up the pen and signed. She had learned to write that name at her grandfather's elbow in a Bristol counting house, where he taught her to distrust any total she had not made herself. That lesson would matter before the winter was out. She did not cry until she was on the stairs, and then only for the length of 11 steps, and then she stopped, because she had 11,000 reasons to keep her face dry, and she intended to use every one of them. The gates of Ravenscourt came out of the dark 3 weeks later at 9 in the evening. 2 worn stone birds on 2 pillars, an avenue of limes a mile long, and at the end of it, the hall standing black against a blacker sky, a great sprawling house with 4 windows lit in 80. Not one of them was lit for her. The chaise stopped and nobody came. Rosalind sat with her hands folded and counted to 60, and then to 60 again, and understood that this too was a message. Then she opened the door herself and stepped down into 3 inches of freezing water. "Not that way, unless you mean to drown." The voice came from under the arch to the stable court, and a man came with it, unhurried, a lantern swinging low, a groom's rough coat, collar turned up, no hat, dark hair flattened to his head with rain, young, very tall. And he looked at her the way a man looks at a horse he has been told to buy and has not yet decided to. The front steps flood, have done since the old Duke laid the drains wrong in 1790. They will not mend them, because mending them would mean admitting he laid them wrong. And nobody thought to tell the woman in the carriage. Nobody thought about the woman in the carriage at all. "Miss, that is rather the house's way." It was an outrageous thing for a servant to say. It was also the first honest sentence anyone had spoken to her since the 14th of November. "Then I am glad to have met the stables before the drawing-room. Which way?" He lifted the lantern and showed her a line of flagstones above the flood, black and shining. Give me your hand. I have my own feet. You have satin shoes and 6 yards of wet muslin, and the second stone is loose." She looked at him. He looked back. He had a hard, well-made face and gray eyes that gave nothing away, and something in the set of his shoulders belonged to no servant she had ever known. If a man had stood like that in her grandfather's yard, the clerks would have straightened. She gave him her hand. His grip was warm through the wet leather and absolutely certain, and it lasted 9 flagstones, and neither of them said a word for the whole of them. At the 9th he let go at once, as though the moment had a price and he had paid it exactly. "Your name," she said. "Jack, miss. Jack Rowe. I keep the horses. Rosalind Fairweather. I know what you are. Not who. What." "And what am I?" The lantern swung, and for half a second, something crossed his face that she would think about afterwards, in a great many quiet rooms. "You are the girl who is to marry the Marquess. The county has had a fortnight to form opinions of you. Mine is not formed yet." How very restrained. I would not call it restraint. I would call it waiting. He set the lantern on the balustrade and stepped back into the rain. "They will keep you standing in that hall a quarter of an hour before anyone comes. If you would take advice from a groom, do not sit down. Whatever they do, stay on your feet." "Why?" "Because the ones who sit," he said, "are the ones they pity." And he was gone before she could ask how a man who mucked out stalls came to know exactly how the great of this house went about breaking people. They kept her standing 22 minutes. She counted, and found a strange steadiness in it, in the cold marble and the 2 footmen who looked through her as though she were a draught, and 4 generations of Ashcrofts, staring down out of gilt frames with the same long nose and the same flat gray eye. When the doors opened, it was not the Duke but a woman of 60 in unrelieved purple, with a lorgnette she plainly did not need. "So, you are the merchant's granddaughter." "I am Rosalind Fairweather." "Yes, that is what I said." The lorgnette came up. Rosalind stood very straight and did not sit, and was fiercely, absurdly grateful to a wet man with a lantern. "I am Lady Sybil Marchmont. You will see my brother at noon. Until then, you are not to write to anyone in Kent, and you are not to be seen from the road. £11,000 is a remarkable sum, Miss Fairweather." The county has been doing arithmetic. She turned, and then said over her shoulder, in the tone of a woman remarking on the weather, "My nephew is not at home. He has not been at home in 8 years. I should not build castles upon him. Whatever else Stanhope may be, he has never once done a thing his father told him to." The door shut. The candles bowed and steadied. Rosalind stood alone in the great cold hall of the house she had been bought into and thought, "Then that is 2 of us." The Duke of Ravenscourt received her at noon in a library the length of a village street, and did not stand. He was a big man gone heavy, florid, handsome, with his son's gray eyes, and he looked at her over a glass of something amber, and let the silence stretch until it began to hurt. "Turn," he said. "I beg your pardon?" "Turn round, girl. I have paid £11,000 and I have not yet seen the whole of it." The room was very warm. A clock ticked behind her. Rosalind thought of 11 steps on a staircase in Kent, and of how she had promised herself she would spend the rest of her life not weeping in front of men who enjoyed it. She turned, all the way round, slowly, like a woman modeling a gown, and came back to face him with her chin up and her eyes dry. "Well?" she said. The Duke laughed. It was not a kind sound, but there was surprise in it. "You will do. You are not pretty enough to make a fool of him and not plain enough to shame me." He told her then what she was for. The Ashcrofts were old and land poor. The entail had bled them a century, and her father's 400 unentailed acres along the new canal cut were worth far more than her father had ever understood. The Duke had bought them with a debt and a daughter, and thought himself clever. "You are the wrapping on a parcel, Miss Fairweather. Do not trouble to be anything more, and we shall get along." "And the Marquis? Is he also the wrapping on a parcel?" The florid face closed like a door. "My son will do as he is bid, or he will learn how a man may be a Marquis and still eat porridge. Ring the bell." That was the shape of her cage, and she found no gap in any of its 4 walls. She might not write to Kent, nor be seen from the road. She might walk in the gardens between 2 and 4, accompanied, and sit in the yellow saloon while Lady Sybil described the sort of woman who marries above herself, and the end such women generally come to. And every evening at 9, she might stand at a window and understand that no part of this was hers. Not the linen, not the name she would take in 3 weeks, not even the anger, which she was obliged to keep folded away like a shift. What nobody had thought to forbid was the stables. She found them at dawn on the 2nd day, because she had not slept, and because the only kind word she had been given at Ravenscourt had been given in a stable yard by a man with a lantern. It was warm in there, warm and dark and smelling of hay and leather and horse, full of the small, honest sounds of animals shifting in straw, and it undid something in her chest so completely that she had to stand with her hand on a stall door and breathe. "You will want the 3rd one along," said Jack Rowe, without looking up from the girth he was mending. "The bay mare, Juno. She is the only one in this yard with any manners. How did you know I was here? You have stood in that door every morning for 2 days and gone away again. I thought I would save us both a 3rd performance." He was in his shirt sleeves despite the cold, a long white scar across the back of his forearm that had not been made by a horse. Rosalind had grown up among men who worked, and she noticed his hands, and that his boots were very bad and very old and had once been very good. "You were rude to me," she said. "It was the only pleasant thing that happened to me all week, and I should like to know why." He looked up, and she had the same sensation she had had in the rain, of being weighed by someone who had every right to weigh her, and no right at all to be standing in a stable while he did it. Because everyone else in this house is being careful with you. Careful is what they are, while they decide what you are worth. I have no money in it, so I say what I see. Then say what you see. "I see a woman who has been sold," said Jack Rowe, "and who has not yet decided whether to be ashamed of it. I would not be. It is not the parcel that ought to be ashamed. It is the men doing the trade." Rosalind found her eyes stinging, and turned away, and busied herself with the mare's nose. "Do you know him, the Marquess?" There was a pause of exactly the wrong length. "I knew him as a boy. He was sent away at 14, when his mother died. His father found he could not look at him afterwards, the boy having her eyes. School, then his mother's people, then Portugal with a regiment. He has not slept a night under this roof in 8 years. And what is he? Everyone here tells me only what he is not." Jack set down the girth. "Proud, hard, where he has had to be. He has spent 8 years being told what he owes his name, and has got into the habit of paying nothing to anybody, in case they should think he can be bought. A beat, he will not like you. No, I imagine he will hate me. He will look at me and see 11,000 pounds and 400 acres of Kent with a woman tied on top like a ribbon, and decide before he has heard me speak that I am grasping." She rubbed the mare's soft nose. "He is being sold too, and he will still find a way to make it my fault. Men generally do." The silence was so complete she could hear the wind under the door. "Why do you say he is being sold?" Jack Rowe's voice had changed. "Because nobody asked him either. There is a man in Portugal or Paris or wherever he is, who is about to be told his father has bought him a wife with a debt, and he will not have been consulted any more than I was, and he will be angry, and he will have nobody to be angry at but me." She lifted a shoulder. "So I have decided to feel sorry for him. It is the only advantage I am likely to have." Jack Rowe did not answer, and was still not answering long after she had gone, and the light had come up gray over the moor, and the girth lay forgotten on the bench beside him. He had come home in the last week of November, in the dark, on a hired hack, having ridden the last 9 miles, because he could not bear to arrive by daylight at a house that had not wanted him in it for 8 years. He had come because a letter from his father's man of business had found him in Lisbon, informing the Marquess of Stanhope that he was to be married on the 2nd of January to a baronet's daughter out of Kent, and that his Grace trusted there would be no difficulty. No difficulty. He had read that sentence a dozen times on the packet, and felt something in him go very quiet and very cold. His mother had been another man's bargain, traded south out of Northumberland at 19, to a man who spent 30 years making her sorry for it. Julian had watched her die in a shuttered wing of that house at 41, and had promised himself over her hand that whatever else he became, he would never be an item in anybody's accounts. So he had not gone into the house. He had gone to the stables, where Hollis had been head groom 35 years, and Hollis had taken one look at him in the lamplight and said, "God love us, it is the boy," and had wept, which Julian had not expected and had not known what to do with. "They will know me in the house." "They will not. Your father turned off the whole household the year her grace died, to stop the talk. There is not a soul under that roof from when you were a lad, barring me and Hannah Pike, and there is not a picture of you hung, because he would not have one hung." Hollis wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. "What is it you want, my lord?" 6 weeks. I want to see what he has bought before it sees me. I want to know whether she came willing." And Hollis, who had put him on his first pony and had never had a good word for the Duke, said, "Then you had best learn to muck out again. You were always slow at it." He had expected a lady's maid and a great deal of noise about the roads. She had come with one trunk, in the rain, and climbed down herself because nobody came. And now she had stood in his own stable at 6 in the morning, in a gown made over twice, and told him she pitied him. Julian sat with his hands hanging between his knees, and looked at nothing for a long while. He had come home to catch a fortune hunter. It was going to be a great deal harder to forgive her for not being one. The ledgers came about because Lady Sybil wished to be unkind. It was the 9th day, and raining, and Rosalind had committed the offense of being found in the yellow saloon with a book of estate maps open on her knee. "Good heavens, are you attempting to learn where the land is?" "I was looking at the canal cut, ma'am." "How very like your family. I forget, you were brought up over a counting house." "My grandfather kept his own books until he was 70, Rosalind said pleasantly. "He said a man who will not read his own accounts has already given his money away, and is merely waiting to be told when." "Charming." Lady Sybil rang the bell so hard the tassel came off in her hand. "Then you shall have the household books, since you love them so. Idle women in this house become romantic, and romantic women become a nuisance." She meant it as a leash, and as a joke the county would have by Sunday. The merchant's granddaughter set to count candles. Rosalind took the books upstairs, lit 2 candles instead of the permitted one, and was still at them at 3 in the morning. Not because she cared about candles, but because for the first time in a month, there was something in front of her that could not lie to her, and it was the greatest comfort she had ever known. By the 4th night she had found it. It was small. That was the thing she would try afterwards to explain to men who did not want to hear it. It was always small, not a hole in the accounts but a slow, patient bleeding, and the only reason she saw it was that she had been raised by a man who checked a total he had not made himself. The Yarrow Farms lay 8 miles north on the edge of the moor, 9 tenancies, and their rents came in through an agent's collection book rather than direct. That book had been kept 4 years in a hand that never once made an error of addition, which is not a thing any honest book has ever done in the history of the world. Every quarter the 9 farms rendered a tidy total. Every quarter the tidy total fell 9 or 10 or 12 pounds short of what the same 9 farms had rendered in 1810. And every quarter there was a note in the same handwriting, allowance for arrears, Yarrow, by direction. By whose direction it did not say. 4 years of it came to above £400, which was a governess for 20 years, and the whole of what her father had once had in a year. She took the book to the stable at dawn, because there was nobody else in Yorkshire she could take it to. "Read that," she said, and only when he had turned it to the light and begun down the column with a frown, did it occur to her that she had handed 4 years of ducal accounts to a groom, and that a groom would not be able to read them. He read for a full minute in silence. "The arrears note is a lie. Yarrow has not had a bad year since the war ended. They have wool, and they have the drove road." He turned back a page, then another. His jaw had gone hard. "Who has the collecting of it?" "It does not say. It says, by direction." She watched him. "How do you come to know about the drove road?" "A groom hears everything and is told nothing," said Jack Rowe, without lifting his eyes, "which is a great deal more than they hear in the drawing room." "Then hear this. I want to go to Yarrow." He looked up. "You are not permitted off the grounds. I am permitted to ride between 2 and 4, accompanied. You are a groom, and if anybody asks, I am a foolish girl who wanted to see the moor." The rain began again on the roof. The horses shifted. He looked at her with something in his face she could not read at all, and that made her heart do something violent and unhelpful. You know what they will say, if you are seen on the moor with a servant. That I am ruined. I have thought of it. She held the book against her chest. But I am already sold, and once a woman is sold, ruin loses a good deal of its power over her. Saddle the mare. They went to Yarrow 4 times in a fortnight, and in 9 low dark kitchens she asked one question, and it was not a clever question, only the right one. What did you pay, and to whom, and did he give you a receipt? They had paid in full, every quarter, 4 years together, and not one of them had ever heard the word arrears. The man who came for the money was a York attorney's clerk who wrote the sum into the blank on the printed receipt himself, afterwards, which no honest man has ever needed to do. The Mabbott farm was the last on the road, low and long, under a turf roof with the moor coming down to the wall behind it. The old woman was 81 and nearly blind and knew exactly who Rosalind was. You are the one they bought. I am. Sit down then, and mind the dog. She poured tea that was mostly leaves. You will want the tin. How do you know that? Because you asked about receipts, and nobody in 40 years has asked me about receipts, and I have been waiting for somebody to. You, under that bed. It is the tin at the back. The man who had come in stooping under the lintel got down on the flagstones in his terrible coat, brought out a tin box the size of a hat box, and set it in Rosalind's lap. The old woman turned her clouded eyes on him for rather a long time. You have your mother's way of standing, she said. A great many people say so. No, said Widow Mabbott, they do not. And she said nothing further about it, and poured him tea, and Rosalind, who had not understood a word of that exchange, would remember every syllable of it in the spring. 4 years of printed receipts, folded in 8, tied with a bootlace. Rosalind sat on the edge of the bed with her hands shaking. Mrs. Mabbott, if I use these, a man in this family will be ruined. Aye, said the old woman comfortably. That is generally what happens when a body keeps a receipt. They rode home into the wind, and Rosalind understood, with the tin strapped behind her saddle, that she was holding a rope, and that a rope may be used to save a man or to hang one, depending on who stands at the other end of it. And on that ride, with the light going lilac over the snow and the mare's breath smoking, she looked across at the man beside her, at his bad boots and the way he sat a horse like a cavalry officer, and said the thing she had been not saying for a fortnight. You are not a groom. His hands did not move on the reins. I muck out 14 stalls a day. That is not what I asked. You read a collection book faster than my father could. You know the drove road and the rent rolls and how the drains were laid in 1790. Hollis takes his hat off to you and then remembers not to. Her voice was very steady and her heart was not. I do not know what you are, and I have decided I do not care. I want one thing, and I want it true, because I have not had a great deal of truth lately, and I am running short. Are you here to do me harm? The wind came off the moor. He stopped his horse, and she stopped hers, and there was nothing in the world but 2 people on a white road in the dark blue afternoon. No, said Julian Ashcroft. I swear it on my mother's grave. Not for anything. Not for any reason. Then that will do, said Rosalind Fairweather, and rode on, and did not see his face. Gerald Ashcroft arrived 3 days before the betrothal ball with a valet, a phaeton, and the finest manners in Yorkshire. He was the Duke's nephew, 10 years older than the absent Marquess, and charming in the particular way of men who have lived a long while on charm, because they have nothing else. He kissed her hand in the hall, said in front of Lady Sybil that Kent had clearly the advantage of Yorkshire in more than climate, and asked after her father's health with such warmth that she was, for a day and a half, taken in. Then over dinner on the second night, apropos of nothing, I am told you have been amusing yourself with the account books. Do give them up. Figures make a woman's face sharp. And Rosalind, who had spent a fortnight in 9 kitchens on the Yarrow Road, looked down the table and saw the smallest thing. His wineglass had stopped exactly halfway to his mouth while he waited for her answer. I have given them up, she said. They were dull. The glass finished its journey. Very wise, said Gerald Ashcroft. He came to her the next morning in the long gallery, and he was not charming. "A word of kindness, cousin. Since we are almost related, you have been riding out with a groom." "With a groom? Yes, it is what grooms are for. 4 times, 8 miles, on the moor road." He smiled. He had very good teeth. "The county is a small place. My uncle is not a forgiving man, and the Marquess is expected within the week. I only observe that a girl bought with a debt has no character to spend. Yours is all borrowed. Be careful how you draw on it." "Thank you," said Rosalind. "I shall be careful." She went upstairs, took Widow Mabbitt's receipts from between the leaves of her mother's letters, and sewed them into the lining of her cloak with her own hands, and her fingers shook so badly that she pricked herself twice and bled on the silk. She had told nobody about Yarrow but a groom, and Gerald Ashcroft had known which road. The betrothal ball was held on the 19th of December, and 240 people came to look at her. They came from 40 miles, in furs and diamonds through the snow, into a house that had blazed with candles in every one of its 80 windows since 4 in the afternoon, and they came to see the Kentish girl who had been bought for £11,000 by a duke who wanted her father's canal frontage. Rosalind came down the great staircase at 9 in white silk with her mother's pearls at her throat, and the noise in the hall below dropped away like a stone down a well, and then rose again, and the sound it made when it rose was laughter. Not loud. It was never loud. That was the thing nobody warned you about. It was the small, silken sound of 200 people turning to their neighbors behind their fans, all at once, in a house where the acoustics carried everything up to the gallery, so that she heard, quite distinctly, 3 separate voices as she came down the last 6 steps. She heard a woman say that she had understood the girl to be handsomer. She heard a man say that 11,000 was a great deal to pay for 400 acres, and that his grace had plainly thrown in the girl to make the parcel look better. And she heard Lady Sybil Marchmont say, to a circle of 6, in a voice pitched for the whole hall, "One cannot fault my brother's economy. He gave rather more for the grey hunter, and the hunter at least came with a pedigree." Rosalind reached the bottom step. She stood in the light of 200 candles in a room full of people who had eaten her father's shame for supper, and she smiled, and she looked directly at Lady Sybil, and she said, clearly enough for the same 6 to hear, "The hunter, ma'am, cost you 300 guineas, and threw your groom in October. I have read the stable book. I am the better bargain, and I do not throw." There was one heartbeat of absolute silence. And then somebody laughed, and it was the wrong sort of laugh, and it went round the hall like fire in dry grass, and Rosalind understood, with a lurch, that she had won the exchange and lost the evening, because a bought girl may be pitied and she may be sneered at, but she may not be witty at the expense of a duke's sister in the duke's own hall. Nobody asked her to dance. 240 people, and the fiddles going, and the sets forming up the length of the long gallery, and the daughters of every family in the North Riding taken out twice and 3 times. And Rosalind Fairweather stood by the 3rd window with her hands folded and her chin level for 1 hour and 50 minutes. And no man in that room came near her. They had agreed it, and it had not needed arranging. That was what made it so complete. They had simply all understood, in the way a flock of birds understands, that the merchant's granddaughter was to be cut, and that whoever led her out would be cut with her. Gerald Ashcroft came at last, at 11, when the thing had been thoroughly seen by everybody, and offered his arm with a face of enormous compassion. "Poor girl," he said, "shall I rescue you?" "No," said Rosalind. "Thank you." She walked the length of the gallery, past all of them, without hurrying, and out through the garden door into the snow in her white silk shoes. The cold hit her like a hand. She got as far as the stone bench under the yews before her legs went, and there, with the fiddles coming faint and gay across the frozen lawn, she put her face in her hands and cried properly for the first time since the 11 steps in Kent, and did not hear him come. She only knew he was there because a rough coat, warm from a man's body and smelling of hay and horse and cold air, came down across her bare shoulders. "Do not," she said, into her hands. "Do not be kind to me. I shall not survive it." "Then I shall be rude," said Jack Rowe, and sat down on the bench beside her, which no servant on earth would have done. "You were the only creature in that room worth looking at, and every one of them knew it, and that is precisely why they did not. You were in the ballroom? I was at the window. There is a terrace outside the third window, and I have been standing on it for an hour and 50 minutes. His voice was not steady. I have never in my life wanted so badly to break something. Rosalind lifted her head. The snow had begun again, very lightly, in fine dry flakes that turned gold as they fell past the windows, and the fiddles inside had struck up a waltz, and the man beside her had a jaw like stone, and his hands closed hard on his knees. They will not dance with me, she said. No, 240 people. Yes. I have been told all my life, said Rosalind, that I must not mind. My mother's family are in trade, and one must not mind. My father lost everything, and one must not mind. I was sold in November, and one must not mind. And tonight 240 people agreed among themselves that I do not exist, and I find that I do mind. I mind so much that I can hardly breathe, and there is nobody in this county I may say it to except a man who mucks out stalls. Julian Ashcroft stood up. He stood up, and he turned to face her in the falling snow, and he put out his hand, palm up, the way a man does at the head of a set. Then dance with me, he said. What? There is a waltz going. You may hear it perfectly well from here. There is nobody on this lawn but the two of us, and I have no reputation whatever to lose. His hand did not waver. Miss Fairweather, 240 people would not dance with you tonight. I would very much like to be the man who did. She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she stood and put her fingers into it and let her other hand come up to rest on the shoulder of a stable hand's shirt, and she felt his palm settle at her waist through the thin silk, careful, an inch further away than it needed to be, as though he were holding something that had been lent to him and would have to be given back. They danced badly. The snow was on the grass. Her shoes were ruined. He was too tall for her, and the music came and went on the wind. They danced anyway, 3 whole turns of it under the black yews, and by the third she had forgotten the house entirely, and when the fiddles stopped, neither of them let go. His face was very close. The snow was in her hair, and she saw, quite plainly, everything he was not saying, and she saw him decide not to say it, and she saw what that decision cost him. Rosalind, he said, it was the first time. There is a thing I must tell you, and I am going to tell you it tomorrow, and when I have told you, you will hate me for 4 or 5 days, and after that, I hope very much that you will not. Tell me now. No, not tonight, not in the snow with you looking like that, or I shall never say it properly. His thumb moved once only, across the back of her hand. Tomorrow, on the moor road, I shall bring the mare, Jack. Tomorrow, he said, and stepped back, and bowed to her. And it was not a servant's bow. It was a bow from the waist, with the head up. The bow of a man, used to rooms full of people watching him do it. And he was gone into the dark of the yew walk. Rosalind stood alone on the frozen lawn with a groom's coat around her shoulders, and her heart going like a hammer. And behind a shuttered window on the first floor, Gerald Ashcroft stood with a candle at his elbow and watched her all the way back to the house. She was woken at 6 by Hannah Pike, who was crying, Miss, get up and put your gown on. They are coming. They came in a body, up the stairs, at 6:15 on the 20th of December, with candles, the Duke in his dressing gown, Lady Sybil fully dressed at that hour, which Rosalind would think about later, Gerald Ashcroft, with an expression of the deepest possible regret, and 2 footmen. Search it, said the Duke. They found the Duchess's pearls in the second drawer of the dressing table, wrapped in one of Rosalind's own handkerchiefs, under her shifts. She said, Those are not mine. Nobody heard her. That was the strangest part. She said it 3 times, and it was as though she had not spoken at all, because the room had already moved on, and the noise in it was Lady Sybil saying that she had known from the first day, and the Duke turning a color that frightened her, and Gerald saying, gently, terribly, Uncle, there is worse, and I would give a great deal not to have to say it. He had seen her, he said, riding on the moor road with a groom, 4 times, 8 miles from the house, for hours together. He had said nothing, hoping to be mistaken. He had said nothing last night when she left the ballroom and stood in the yew walk in a man's arms for 1/4 of an hour. He was sorry, more sorry than he could express. But the Marquess was expected on the 28th, and the pearls rather settled it. The Duke did not shout. He looked at her for a long moment, and what was in his face was not rage. It was the flat, incurious contempt of a man who has been proved right about something he never really doubted. Out, he said. Now, this hour, nothing that this house paid for. Your Grace, the pearls were put there. I can tell you exactly why, and I can prove it, and it will take you 1 hour with the Yarrow collection book. The notes are called in, said the Duke of Ravenscourt. Tell your father the Marshalsea will have him by Friday. Sybil, see she takes nothing, and find out which groom, and turn him off without a character. It was still dark when they put her out at the end of the Mile of Limes, with her 1 trunk, and no character, and no money, in the cloak with 4 years of receipts sewn into its lining, and the snow coming down. The great gates shut behind her with a sound like a book closing. She walked 4 miles in the snow before anybody would take her up, and the carrier who did made her sit on the tail of his cart with her trunk, because he had heard already, by 9 in the morning, what she was supposed to have done. That was how fast it went. 9 in the morning, 6 miles out. At Kirkby, the landlady of the Ravenswood Arms looked at her for 4 seconds and said there was no room, in a house with 14 rooms and 2 chaises in the yard. In the street, a woman she had spoken to at the ball 9 hours before, a Mistress Fenwick, who had admired her pearls, gathered her daughter's arm in and crossed to the other side of the road and did it slowly so that it would be seen. Rosalind sat down at last in the public parlor of the smaller inn at the bottom of the town, where nobody knew her yet, and ordered tea she could not pay for, and got out a pencil. Arithmetic was the only thing she had left, so she did it. £4 9 sewn into her stays. Kirkby to Bristol by the mail was £3 12 inside, or £1 9 outside in December, which was a thing that killed people. Her father would be taken on Friday, and it was Wednesday. No character. No letter. By Sunday, every house within 40 miles would have the story, and by the new year, every house in England that mattered, because the Ton did not keep a thing like this to itself. It posted it, like a bill. She wrote to her father. She got as far as the words, "Do not be afraid, and do not sell anything before I write again," and then stopped, because she had nothing to put after it, and half a comfort is worse than none. Then she did the last piece of arithmetic. A woman of 22 with no character cannot be a governess, or a companion, or a wife. But her grandfather's counting house in Queen Square had been sold to a man named Verity, who kept the old clerks on, and a clerk is not required to be respectable, a clerk is required to be right. So, Bristol, the outside seat, and probably 2 toes gone. £40 a year and a bed, and she would be very good at it, and she would live to be 60, and never again stand in a room where 240 people had agreed she did not exist. And she would never see him again. That was the item at the bottom of the column, and it was the only one that would not add. She put her head down on the scarred table in the empty parlor of a Yorkshire inn, and cried until there was nothing left in her, and then she washed her face in the water jug, and sat up straight and waited for 4 o'clock, because she was her grandfather's granddaughter, and the mail does not care what has happened to you. 21 miles away, in a coffee house in Coney Street in York, Julian Ashcroft had been sitting since 8 in the morning with the whole of his mother's money turned into paper in front of him. He had done it badly, and expensively, and in a hurry. He had gone to his father's man of business at 7, and said he wished to purchase the Fairweather notes at face, in cash, immediately, and Pruitt had named a figure, £800 above face, and Julian had paid it, because Pruitt understood, before Julian did, exactly what was being bought. He had the notes in his hand, and he was not thinking about £11,000. He was thinking about how he would say it. He had rehearsed it the length of the York Road. "My name is Julian Ashcroft. I have been lying to you for a month. Here is your father's debt, in the fire. Marry me because you like me, and for no other reason in the world." He was going to say it that afternoon in the yew-walk, and he was, God help him, almost happy. Then the door came open and Hollis was in it, hatless, grey in the face, with a foundered horse in the street behind him, and he said, "My lord, they have put her out. There is a particular kind of silence that comes into a man at a moment like that, and Julian would know it for the rest of his life. It was not rage. Rage came afterwards, in the saddle, on the York Road. What came first was a very clear and very cold understanding of his own account. He had watched her stand for 22 minutes in a hall. He had watched her turn round in a library like a mare at Tattersall's. He had stood on a terrace in the snow for 1 hour and 50 minutes and watched 240 people refuse to dance with the woman he loved, and he had gone on standing there, in a groom's coat, because he had wanted 6 weeks of being liked for nothing, and every hour of those 6 weeks had been paid for by her. Every single one of them. And now she was out on the moor road in December, with no character and no name, and it had cost him nothing at all. He burned the notes there, in the coffee-house fire, in front of a room of astonished tradesmen, and did not wait to see them finish. He was on the road by 9:30, and he did not spare the horse. The mail for London went from the Ravenswood Arms at Kirkby at 4 in the afternoon. Rosalind was still sitting in the corner of the parlor at 1 o'clock, with a cold cup in front of her and 3 hours to wait, when the inn-yard door came open so hard it struck the wall. She knew the boots first. She had looked at those boots every morning for a fortnight. But the rest of him was wrong. The greatcoat with 3 capes, the tall hat, the black horse steaming in the yard behind him with a stable lad hanging onto its head, and the innkeeper already bowing so low his apron touched the floor and saying, my lord, we had no word." Rosalind stood up very slowly. The whole parlor was looking at him. He was looking only at her. "My name is Julian Ashcroft," he said. "I am the Marquess of Stanhope. I have been mucking out my father's stables for a month, and I have been lying to you since the night you came, and I am not going to make you a single excuse for it." The room was quite silent. Somebody's teacup went back into its saucer with a small clash. "You," said Rosalind. "I came home in November because my father wrote to tell me he had bought me a wife," Julian said. "I thought you would be a scheming girl who had sold herself for a title. I meant to look at you for a week from behind a horse, and then go back to Portugal and never come home again. And then you climbed out of a chaise in the rain, with one trunk, and told me that you pitied the man you were to marry, because nobody had asked him either." His voice cracked on it. "I have had a month to tell you, and I did not. And the reason I did not is the worst reason there is, which is that I was afraid the moment you knew, you would stop speaking to me like a person and start speaking to me like a marquess. Everybody does. My father made certain of it before I was 14. They put me out of your house at 6 this morning," Rosalind said. Her voice was shaking. "They said I was a thief. I know. I was in York. Hollis rode after me and killed a horse doing it." He came 2 steps closer and stopped. "Rosalind, my father can cut me off from every unentailed acre and shilling he has, and when he hears what I am going to say to him, he will. I would be a marquis with a name and no money, which in this county is a joke they will tell for 30 years. I am asking you anyway, in front of these people, and I will ask you again in front of 240 if it will mend anything. Will you marry me? Not the settlement, not the 11,000. I have already burned the notes. You have what?" "I bought them from my father's man of business at 7 o'clock this morning with the whole of what my mother left me," he said, "and I burned them in the fire of a coffee house in York, and your father has not been anybody's debtor since 9:30 this morning. That is not a gift, and it does not oblige you to anything. It only means that whatever you say to me now, you say free." Rosalind Fairweather stood in a public parlor in Kirkby, with a cold cup of tea beside her, and the whole of the North Riding waiting to hear her answer. "You were on the terrace," she said. Julian stopped. "For 1 hour and 50 minutes, Rosalind said. "You told me so yourself, and you said it as though it were a gift. You stood 20 feet from that window and watched 240 people agree that I was nothing, and you had in your mouth the one word that would have ended it. One word. You had only to walk in at the garden door and say your own name, and every creature in that gallery would have been at my feet inside a minute. And instead, you waited until they had all gone home and came out into the snow and danced with me where nobody could see." "Yes," he said. "Say why." "Because it would have ended the ball," Julian said, "and it would also have ended the month. The instant I said my name, you would have looked at me the way they all look at me. and I wanted one more week of you telling me the truth in a stable." His hands had closed at his sides. "There is no better answer than that. I have been trying to find one since 9:30 this morning, and there is not one. I let you be humiliated to buy myself 6 weeks of being liked. That is the whole of it, and I would give both my hands to have that hour and 50 minutes back, and I cannot." "No," Rosalind said, "you cannot." The parlor was so quiet she could hear the fire. "I am not going to tell you it does not signify," she said. "It signifies. I stood by that window and counted, my lord, and I shall be counting for a good while yet. And there will be evenings when I look at you and think of it, and you will have to sit still and let me." Her chin came up, and her eyes were streaming, and her voice did not shake at all. "But you came at 9:30 with your mother's money in your hand, before you knew whether I would ever speak to you again. A man may be a coward for 6 weeks, and honest afterwards. My father was a coward for 3 years and honest at the end, and I have forgiven him, and he was not 1/10 so useful to me as you are about to be." "Useful," Julian repeated. "Useful." She bent and took her trunk by the handle and set it on the table and began to unpick the stitching in the lining of her cloak with her thumbnail. "You asked me to marry you. I will answer you in front of your father and your aunt and every one of those 60 people, and not before, because I am not going to be a girl who was rescued at an inn. I have been given away in one room already, and I did not care for it." "Then what do you want?" "I want a chaise, and 14 miles, and 1 hour of your father's time," said Rosalind Fairweather. "I say we are going back." They went back in a hired chaise, with the black horse tied behind, and she talked the whole 14 miles, fast, with her hands moving, and by the 4th mile, Julian had stopped looking at her mouth and started writing on the back of a letter. The house was full when they came into it. That was the one mercy in the whole business, and it was Lady Sybil's doing. She had summoned the neighborhood to a hastily arranged nuncheon in order to give the county the story in her own version before it got about in anybody else's, and so there were some 60 people in the long gallery, the same people, wearing the same faces, when the doors opened. The Duke of Ravenscourt rose out of his chair. "You," he said, "you are—" "Home," said his son. "Yes." The noise that went round that gallery was worth, Rosalind thought afterwards, a very great deal. But she did not let him finish it. She had asked him for that in the chaise, and he had given it to her without an argument, which was the moment she had known, privately, entirely, what she was going to do with the rest of her life. She walked into the middle of the room in a cloak she had slept in, and stood in front of 60 people who had not danced with her, and she said, "Your Grace, in the last 4 years you have been robbed of £413, and I can show you every shilling of it in 20 minutes. Then she began to unpick the lining of her cloak. She laid Widow Mabbott's receipts out on the long table in 4 rows by quarter day, and beside them the Yarrow collection book, and she read out what the 9 tenants had paid, and what the book said they had paid, and she did it in the flat, unhurried voice of a Bristol counting house, and nobody in that gallery breathed. She showed them the arrears note that had never once been true. She showed them that the collecting clerk was employed by an attorney in Coney Street in York, retained 4 years ago on the written direction of a member of the family, and that any magistrate might send for the letter book that afternoon. "You would not hear me this morning," she said to the Duke. "You had bought me, and so you thought you knew what I was. Hear me now. It is not a stranger. It is not a steward. It is somebody who has known for 4 years that the Marquess was abroad, and the West Wing was shut, and nobody in this house has read a total in a decade." And every head in the long gallery turned, at exactly the same moment, in exactly the way she had seen them turn on the night of the ball, and looked at Gerald Ashcroft. Gerald Ashcroft laughed. It was a very good laugh. He had been living on charm for 20 years and had never needed it so badly, and he did it beautifully, and half the room went with him for a moment, because half a room always will. "Bravo," he said, "truly. Uncle, she has had a hard morning and a great deal of arithmetic in a cold bedchamber, and now she is here in yesterday's cloak with a bundle of an old woman's grocery bills, and we are all to forget that my aunt's pearls were found this morning under her shifts." "Hear, hear," said Sir Marcus Threlfall from the window, comfortably, into his glass. He had been at the ball. He had not danced with her either. The girl is very quick, Gerald, I grant you that. Quick is not the same as honest. 3 or 4 voices murmured with him, and one of the ladies laughed, and Rosalind stood in the middle of the room and let it go over her, because she had learned in 1 month exactly how long that sort of noise lasts, and exactly how little it is worth. Yes, she said, let us not forget that. I would not dream of it. How were they wrapped? Gerald turned his head. I beg your pardon? You were in my bedchamber at 6:15 this morning, she said. There were 7 people in that room. 6 of them are in this gallery. Tell them how the pearls were wrapped when the footman lifted them out of the drawer. In a handkerchief. Yours. Anybody who was there. Anybody who was there. Quite so. Rosalind did not raise her voice. Now tell them where they had been kept before that. The silence went on a beat too long. Gerald spread his hands and gave the room his easiest smile and said, out of my uncle's strongbox, of course. She had only to walk into his bedchamber while he was at dinner, as any of us might. And the Duke of Ravenscourt stood up so slowly that his chair went over behind him. Who told you they were in the strongbox? The gallery went absolutely still. My wife's pearls were in her dressing case in the west wing, said the Duke. His voice had gone strange and thin. Every soul in this house believes it, because I let them, and my sister believes it, and the girl there believes it. I took them out of that case with my own hands the week her grace was buried, and I have kept them in the box beside my bed for 9 years, and I have never spoken of it to one living creature in England, because I did not choose to be asked why a man keeps his dead wife's pearls where he can reach them in the dark. He was looking at his nephew as though he had never seen him before in his life. Gerald, how do you know where they were? Gerald Ashcroft looked round the long gallery. He looked at 60 faces which had, at the ball, all turned the same way at the same moment, and were doing it again now, and not one of them was turned towards him. Then he ran. They took him at the gate lodge before he reached the limes, and he was in York Gaol before dark, and never in his life said a graceful thing again. The attorney's letter book went to the magistrate on Tuesday, and the sum, when the whole of it was told, was £413 and 9 shillings, which was, to the penny, what a merchant's granddaughter had said it was in a room where nobody had wanted to hear her. The gallery emptied itself in 4 minutes, which was the fastest 60 people had moved in that house in living memory, and by 4 o'clock, the story was in Kirkby, and by Sunday, it was in London. That left 3 of them in the long gallery with the receipts still lying on the table in 4 rows by quarter day. You will want the settlement redrawn, said the Duke. There will be no settlement, Julian said. Do not be a fool, the Kentish acres. Stay in Kent. Julian had not moved from the door. Sir, I am going to say one thing to you, and then I am going to say nothing further about any of it for the rest of your life, and you would greatly oblige me by hearing it standing up. You sold my mother's son. You did it in a letter, to Lisbon, in a hand I did not recognize, because you have not written to me in 8 years. And when I came home to see what you had bought, I found a woman who had been kept standing 22 minutes in your hall, and made to turn round in your library, and cut by every guest at your own table. And this morning you put her out of your gates in the snow, without hearing one word she had to say, because she was cheap, sir. That is the whole of it, because you had got her cheap, and a thing you get cheap is a thing you may throw away. You did all of that in this house. You did the same thing in this house to my mother for 30 years, and I watched you do it. And I was 14 and I could not stop you. And I have spent 8 years in other people's countries, so that I would not have to watch it again. The Duke of Ravenscourt stood in the middle of his own gallery and did not say one word. I am not going to leave, said his son. That is what you are waiting to hear, so hear it. I am going to stay, and I am going to marry her, and you may cut me off from every shilling and every unentailed acre you have, and I will keep this estate anyway on the rents you have not been reading, and you may live in it as long as you like, but you will never again in your life speak to my wife the way you spoke to her yesterday. Not once, not one syllable. That is the price of my staying, and it is the only thing I have ever asked you for. There was a very long silence. You have no notion what it costs to hold a thing like this together, the Duke said at last. 400 years. Every man in this family has done what he was told and married where he was told, and I did, and my father did, and it has never once been asked of us whether we cared for it. You speak as though I invented the world." "No, sir," said Julian. "You only kept it up after she was dead." The Duke put his hand out and rested it on the back of the fallen chair, and he was a long time straightening it, and the room let him take his time. "She used to keep the household books herself," he said at last, to nobody in particular. "The first year. She was better at it than Pruitt, and she laughed at me for it, and I told her it was not becoming." He crossed to the table where 4 years of an old woman's receipts were laid out in the winter light, and he stood looking down at them, an old, heavy, florid man in his own house, and he did not apologize, because he was not a man who had ever learned how. He picked up the Yarrow collection book instead, and held it out to Rosalind, and said, "These are yours, all of them, every book in this house. I do not want to see one of them again." And Rosalind Fairweather, who had been in that room to be vindicated and not to be forgiven, discovered that she did not want anything from him at all, which was its own kind of ending. The county talked about that for longer than it talked about Gerald. Julian asked her again on the terrace, at dusk, in front of Hollis and Hannah Pike and 6 grooms and every housemaid who could find a window, because she had told him at the inn that she would not be a girl who was rescued in a private room, and he had understood her the first time and had not needed it explained. "In front of witnesses," he said, loudly, "so that nobody in this house may ever say I was made to." "Nobody in this house would dare," said Rosalind. "Nobody in this house has met my aunt." She laughed, which she had not done in 2 days, and it broke something open in her, and she had to put her hand over her mouth. "Yes," she said, "yes, ask me again in the morning as well. I mean to be asked a great many times, my lord. I was 3 weeks in this house being told what I was for, and I find I have developed a taste for being asked." They were married from the Ravenscourt chapel on the 2nd day of January, as the contract had said, and not one line of the contract was kept. No settlement, no £11,000, and no 400 acres in Kent, which stayed where they were, in the name of Sir Edmund Fairweather, who gave his daughter away with his hands shaking, and was forgiven on the church step. 240 people came. They came 40 miles through the snow to see the woman they had refused to dance with, and they bowed to her going in, and they bowed to her coming out, and Lady Sybil Marchmont curtsied in the porch to a merchant's granddaughter, and would go on curtsying for 20 more years. Rosalind never once mentioned it. She had discovered that she did not need to. In April, when the moor turned and the lambs came in at Yarrow, she rode out at 6 in the morning as she always had, in an old habit with the hem let down, because there was a new drainage cut to be walked, and 9 tenants who now dealt with the Marchioness direct. Her husband was in the stable yard before her, holding the bay mare, in his shirt sleeves, with straw on his boots. "You do not have to do that any more," she said. "I know," said Julian. "I like it. It is where I found you." He put his hands at her waist to lift her up, and did not, quite, and she came down off the mounting block instead, and stood in the cold, bright yard with her forehead against his, and he kissed her once, slowly, in the smell of hay and horses and morning, with the light coming up gold over the moor. Then she got on the mare, and he swung up beside her, and the two of them rode out through the arch and down the mile of limes together, the Marquess and the girl who had been sold to pay a debt, going to count somebody's sheep,